Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies after a fascinating conversation on the future of the Space Force, its merits, an all-star panel that discussed it. But there were many stars in the audience as well, including Whit Peters, who was former Secretary of the United States Air Force, who's chairman of the Air Force Association, obviously a partner with Williams and Connolly. Whit, fascinating conversation. What did you think? I mean, there were two Air Force secretaries that were in the audience. Mike Donnelly also was there, so it's, and we had a former Air Force Chief of Staff as well, Nordy Schwartz, was there. What did you think about the conversation? Because I know that airmen are thinking a lot about this. I know the Air Force leadership is thinking about it. Obviously, the President's given his direction, so the service will salute crisply and execute as best as it can. But from your standpoint, what did you think were some of the key points that were made here on this discussion?
You know, I think really there are several. First is I think unfortunately the money is going to be a problem. I mean, there is only so much money. Happily it's more this year than it's been some years in the past. But the reality is the budget shares don't really change very much. And if you go and try to pull the money out of the Air Force, Army, and Navy, I suspect that you're going to end up with an amount of money that you don't really like. It's really not going to solve any of the acquisition problems which Congress seems to want to solve. So I think the money issue is a hard issue, and it's one that I think the Congress is going to have to grapple with, as well as the Department, about how are you going to get the assets out that you want. I guess the other thing that impresses me is the complexity of actually doing this. And Bob Kaler pointed out, and others, that normally if you have a force, they have both offensive operations and defensive operations. And the primary point today of creating this force is to be able to defend what we have in space, not to attack from space. So is it really a question, have we crossed a decision point here where we're actually going to start attacking from space? I mean, I'm old enough to remember, when Reagan was talking about smart pebbles and other things which actually had offensive capabilities in terms of missile defense. Are we going to go there? I know the commander of Missile Defense Agency has said a couple times he's looking at space-based interceptors. Whether that's something the American public really wants, I don't know. At least right now, I think we've not crossed the line to offensive assets in space. And I've also seen some people talking about things like transporting goods through space. It is hard to imagine a type of good that would be so valuable on the battlefield that you would pay that much money to lift it in a rocket and then parachute it in from space. But I think all of these are things that really have to be thought about. And the two things: one, the idea of a unified space command makes enormous sense to me. Whether it's a unified command or a sub-unified command, I don't think makes a whole lot of difference. But I've always been surprised that the space command we once had was taken down, because I think to do anything operationally, you need a command to basically organize that. That's not what the services do. That's what the commands do. And I guess the other thing that I'm worried about is what to do about the Space and Missile Center. I mean, there have been stories about moving all of this to Huntsville. SMC has about 6,000 employees. They're also in an area of Los Angeles which has traditionally hosted a huge amount of the space industry. It seems to me that that kind of a geographic movement doesn't make a huge amount of sense, and that even if you think Space and Missile Center is part of the problem really is acquisition reform, and you take that up with the people who are there who are very competent. So I think there are a number of things that need to be worked out. Obviously, the administration is moving. I think the first steps taken by the department are basically correct, but there's a lot of complexity and a lot of detail to see where it goes.
Obviously, that would also be it's now. I mean, even in this process, right? It's the latest disruption on the Pentagon leadership, which is looking at an acquisition reorganization, and so many other bits of the portfolio are changing. But I want to take you to your big conference. Right. You've been preparing all year, Air Force Association for the.
Trying to get a hurricane here on time.
Yeah, you've been doing very well on that. What your planning abilities, as usual, are consummate. But aside from Space Force, what are going to be some of the big issues? What's the theme for this year's conference? What are the big issues that you want to tackle? Because it's really an all-star gathering of current but past as well as future air power leaders there. It's such a great opportunity to just sort of reset all your needles for the year in Air Force coverage. Talk to us a little bit about what the big themes this year are going to be.
Well, I think the most important themes are trying to restructure the Air Force to be able to handle the current defense strategy. I think this is the first conference at the Gaylord we've had after everybody's had the chance to think about what a major power competition looks like. So starting with the first speaker, the Secretary is going to announce what she feels is the correct sizing of the Air Force for the new missions that are implicit in a major power competition. She has talked about it to a fair amount to the press. I think it's going to be a really major speech. I know she's trying to come up with a a way to explain what the Air Force does. It's like the 355-ship Navy, which is like the 600-ship Navy and the other things. But, you know, it's really is a problem because the Air Force does a great many things, and so it's a little hard to talk about it in terms of squadrons or platforms, but they've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think it's going to be a major speech. I assume the chief is going to follow up with a lot of pieces of that as well. I don't actually know what he's going to talk about. We also have Jeff Bezos from Blue Origin, and obviously from the Washington Post, and from Amazon. We also have Gwen Shotwell from SpaceX coming. And I really think those are going to be important speeches, where we talk about space is what can industry do in space? What can they add to what we're already doing? How can they reduce cost or increase capabilities? I mean, obviously both SpaceX and Blue Origin, if they all work like hoped, will add amazing capabilities to space that we don't currently have now in the Air Force. So it'll be interesting what they say. A lot of the other panels are focused on things like how do you do force projection into an A2D2 environment, but this time people are really trying to have to focus hard on, if you have to go into a China or Russia, how do you really project power? So we have a panel on that. We have a number of panels on acquisition reform. I think everybody knows that acquisition does not move at the speed of need, and I don't know, frankly, what will ever make it do that, but we're going to have some people who are going to try to talk about that. I mean, we've been talking about that for years. I mean, I was on the Section 800 panel in the late 1980s and early 1990s, which gave you FARA and FASA, the most recent major acquisition reforms. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with. At this point, it doesn't seem to me that it's that people think it more as a restructuring. We set up this special capability over here or this other capability over there, and all of a sudden we solve the problem. But what I keep wondering about is, well, we have like we have 50,000 acquisition people. We have 2 or 3 of these special offices. What about the rest of the 40,000 people? What are they going to do, and how are we going to make that faster? And so that's going to be an issue. And I guess finally, we have a fair amount of focus on the Air Force family, talking about issues that are important to spouses and families, and that, with the chief and the secretary and their spouses, and the chief master sergeant and his spouse will hold a town hall panel to try to talk to people. And I guess finally, the most important thing in many ways is we expect to have more than the 9,000 people we had last year. So it's not only the space leadership and the Air Force leadership is going to be there. It's enlisted men and women. It is junior officers. It is people who are starting their lives or continuing in their lives in the Air Force, to listen and talk to what people are saying and have an opportunity to interact with people. I think that's perhaps as important as having the leadership there.
It's actually one of the fun things is to talk about junior officers, so that when we hear from the generals panels, with all due respect to the generals, it's always great to talk to the junior, to junior officers, mid-grade officers, but also enlisted folks on, hey, so do you think the emperors have clothes or not? As a general rule, I think that folks do have confidence in their leadership. And it was funny, so there were 2 other points. I remember those acquisition reform panels, which is where I started my career, so it's a dating function. And I also thought how great it would be to have a hypersonic transport plane with an AMC logo on the side of that. Shout out to the folks at Mobility Command.
Well, then the question to be, is it Guard, Reserve, or Active Duty?
Yeah. Well, it's a total force, Whit. It's a total force. So talk to us a little bit about some of the innovations. Every year, I mean, registration was, not letting it go to your head nor trying to jinx it was really, really smooth, because I know that that's a focus for every major show. What are some of the things that folks will see a little bit different this year than other years?
First of all, we hope registration is actually smoother and faster. So that's obviously a problem. We expect 9,000 plus people. You really have to get them through the registration line fairly quickly. We now have an expanded corridor of 501c3 charities. We're honoring the Air Force Enlisted Village for its 50th year. We're honoring the Air Force Aid Society for its 75th year. We're honoring the Air Force Science Advisory Board for its 75th year, and the Skunk Works. So we're trying to look at some of the history of the Air Force, and so you'll see a lot of discussion of history and things at the dinner on Wednesday night. I think the exhibition hall will also be spectacular. I mean, we have sold it out a year ago, and people are really putting effort into this, so I think there's going to be a lot of whiz-bang stuff down there, including the opportunity to put on reality goggles and play basketball at the AFA site, and you can try to beat General Spencer, who claims he will beat all comers. So that should be kind of fun as well.
Well, I mean, having seen General Spencer play ball, he's actually pretty good.
It's pretty good.
I'm not going to bet against him.
Now, the question is with virtual reality goggles on, how will he do? I mean, this is going to be kind of fun to see. So this is care of AT&T has given us their virtual reality basketball set to let people play on the exhibit floor. So we'll see if that how that works out.
Are we going to see out on the court and showing some moves there?
I probably have no moves left, but we'll see how that works out.
Whit Peters, Chairman of the Air Force Association and former Air Force Secretary. Sir, thanks very much. Always eager. It's going to be a real treat to cover it this year as always.
Good. Well, thank you. It's going to be, I think, a lot of fun. I'm just wishing the hurricane wasn't coming to add even more fun to the process. So thank you.